Amen. Today we have a message out of Exodus chapter 1, starting at verse 7 through 14. Exodus chapter 1, starting verse 7 through 14. So now you see it. And we know that Jacob went down with his sons and their wives into Egypt, where Joseph and his wife and 2 sons already were. When we pick it up at verse 7, it says, "And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them." So God made it plain to Jacob and to the family that this was the hand of God when they went down. And you see the result. God blessed them. Now when you think of it, it sounds contrary. So God takes his people and he brings them into Egypt, a land that isn't their own, ruled by a whole bunch of gods that have nothing to do with the real God. But yet it says, children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. So it's like God blessed them. God said he was going to do that, and that's exactly what he did. And you look at it and say, well, but why would he bring them into a heathen land? It didn't belong to them, where they worship strange gods. Yet he did, and he brought them there and blessed them. It says, verse 8 now, this is where it gets interesting. It says, "Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph." It's interesting because it's like, well, the reason why they were invited down was because God used Joseph to prepare Egypt for 7 years of famine. And he did a great job, and Pharaoh was happy with that. So he said, well, you got family, move them on down. And they were happy, they were grateful. It's like, things changed. Verse 8, "Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph." Didn't remember that history. It's a whole different deal. That was then, this is now. Was the approach, right? "And he said to his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we." So this is kind of uncomfortable. There's more Jews than there are Egyptians in Egypt. And he says, and mightier. So in other words, they're actually doing better than the Egyptians. So he's acknowledging the fact that, he's feeling vulnerable. There's more Jews and they're prospering more than what the Egyptians are. So he goes on to verse 10, he says, "Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them out of the land." It's strange. You'd think, well, he'd want them out of Egypt, right? And he says, no. We don't want there to be a war, and they actually leave the country. Because he knew that they were prospering by the fact that there were Jews there. Pharaoh knew that the hand of God for blessing was on the Israelis, and he knew, well, if they leave, they're leaving with all their stuff. So the way that they've prospered this country is going to be gone. So this is his worry. So he says, verse 11, "Therefore let us set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses." He said, well, let's enslave them. That's how we can keep them. All this seems natural. It's okay, there's a logical sequence. He's in verse 12. "But the more they afflicted them, the more the Egyptians afflicted the Jews," he said, "the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel." They can't get it. How is it we're making life tougher for them, and that they multiply and grew, and even in spite of that? It didn't make sense to the Egyptians. But even more interesting is, what about the Jews? So they came down into Egypt and they prospered and things were good. Now all of a sudden the Egyptians are moving against them. Now you see the blessing of God, and now you don't. So it's like, so what's going on? Now that's relevant because all of us have seen God move in our lives and we've seen blessing, and then all of a sudden it stops. Everything has a season. That's why Paul said, I know how to be abased and I know how to abound. It works both ways. There's seasons in everything. But the thing is, the hand of and the blessing of God is still there. How do we know that? Because he says, the more they were afflicted, the more they multiplied and grew. So, if you look at the circumstances, it's like all of a sudden they're in slavery, and it's like, it's easy to look from the outside, for the Jews to look and say, wait a minute, this isn't God's blessing, this isn't God's prosperity, and yet things were still good. They're still having babies, they're still multiplying. God was still blessing them. They weren't dying off, they weren't getting killed off. So why is that important? Because just because our circumstances change in ways that we don't like, in ways that we see negative, and there's no reason to not see slavery as negative, it doesn't mean that it isn't part of God's plan. You can say, well, how could it be God's plan to put me into slavery? You haven't seen the end of the end of the program yet. I submit, if they'd continued to prosper and to fill up Egypt, they might have. And then God comes with Moses and says, okay, I want to bring you to a promised land. What would be your result? I mean, you got a big mansion, you got Egyptians working for you, and you're going to say, yeah, I want to leave all my stuff and go to a country I don't know and to go fight for it. It's like, yeah, sounds like a good program. I don't think so. So there's a whole process but we're looking at it here and it's like, this doesn't look good. But it's like, who says it isn't good? Is God preparing them? You have to have the right attitude. So, and this isn't about Jews, this is about human nature. The more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. So this is really getting under the skin of the Egyptians. Verse 13, and the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. They worked them hard. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. In mortar and in brick and in all manner of service in the field, all their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. The whole point of this is you can't look at your circumstances and just decide the circumstances I don't like, so God mustn't be in it. You can't look at your circumstances and exclude God at all, because sometimes you do. It's like, things are good, I got a raise, I got a bonus. Well, what makes you think that God didn't have something to do with that? Where's the God in the I? Whatever you got, God gave to you. So it's not, I got a raise or I got a bonus. It's like God gave me a bonus. It's a fundamental change in perspective there. And it's like, so your car got bashed in, it was a hit and run, and you didn't see it. It's like, okay, but God allowed that. Now, why did he allow that? You can look at the car getting smashed in and you can be all angry about that. But what is God saying about this? Your attitude towards it getting smashed up tells you something about what God wanted to address. He wanted to bring that attitude out so that he could address it. Because guess what? It's not your car. What do you mean? I make payments on it. Yeah? When you die, you're taking it with you? No, then it's not your car. You're not taking anything with you. Not even your body. That gets left behind. So, we come with nothing, we go with nothing. Actually, we go with less than what we come with. We at least come with a body. We don't go with it. What's the point? The point is, we can only look at our context, our situation, not in terms of whether we like it or not. That's irrelevant. In fact, whether we like it or not, that's something that we need to bring to God to ask him to adjust our attitude, because we can only look at our circumstances in the context of what God is doing in our lives. And sometimes he's just not going to give us an explanation. Because if he tells us what he's doing, it's going to miss the whole point of the work he's doing in us. And that's most of what life is. Stuff happens every day. You don't know why it happens. He's not going to tell you the day before, and then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, so that you can avoid that stuff. It's like, no. He wants you to walk through. He wants you to have a right attitude. Why does he want you to have a right attitude? So that your Christianity, so that the Jesus in you shines into the world, and they say, they got something I need.
Amen.
Now we come back to this story. They went down, they saw the blessing of God. Now you see it. This is good stuff. And then all of a sudden it turns around and they end up enslaved. Yet they still continue to prosper and multiply. Now, if you look in a narrow context, it looks like, oh, God abandoned them. I mean, they're in slavery, right? But then on the other side, it's like they continue to multiply. Because even in the midst of the difficulties, God still blesses them. God still takes care of them. See, that's the real issue there. It's not whether you like your circumstances. The question is God still working in your life? Is he abandoning you? Or is he just working on something? You always got to ask that question. What is he doing? And you can't ask that question unless you got a relationship with him in the first place. Because you can ask other people, they can't tell you. Only God can answer that question. And he won't answer that question unless you got a relationship with him. You have to be in the Spirit. In the same way, you can go up to someone and talk English to them, but if they don't talk English, it's not going to help you much. God only talks in the Spirit. And so if you're in the flesh and he's in the Spirit, there's not going to be any communication. You're going to end up frustrated. So what do? You have to get into the Spirit. That means getting past the I part. The angry and dissatisfied and bratty stuff, we got to get that all off the table. We have to worship him as the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. And then we can start getting some answers. And even then, if he decides not to answer you, you got to be satisfied with that. Why? Because if he won't give you an answer, a direct answer, he will at least give you peace. And when all he gives you is peace, it's everything that you need. You will get the whole picture later. But he doesn't tell you exactly when. That's the whole point. We'll come back. This is a very unique time in the life of Israel. But it's also something that we live. Our lives match this. Because there are times when God moves sovereignly and you see him work and you get all excited. But then when it appears that that work has stopped, which it hasn't, he's just shifted, you can't get excited about the fact that it isn't as much fun as it used to be. It's kind of like having a baby. You get all excited when you first get pregnant, but you know what? Towards the end of that pregnancy, it's no fun carrying that baby. And after the baby's born, wow, now you got some work. There's nothing that demands more time than a baby. Why? Because they're helpless. And then on top of that, they got personalities too, which may or may not agree with you at any particular time. It's life. That's what this message is about. Yes, enjoy the good times when God brings them, but recognize it doesn't last forever. Things are going to change. And the change isn't necessarily for the worse. There may be something worse in terms of the physical side, but it's always for the better in a spiritual context. That's what you want to remember. It's always there ultimately to draw you closer to God. Embrace those times. Embrace those moments. Other people will look and they won't understand, and they'll encourage you to have a temper tantrum, pity party. That's not where God wants you to go. Get into his presence. Draw on the fullness of his goodness. And that's our message for today. Now we will receive the offering.